Hello, everyone. This is Rumti. I'm here to do a deck tech slash sideboard guide for mono green aggro slash mono green stompy, whatever you'd like to call it. I love this deck for the ladder right now. I was able to win the race to Mythic and hold number one with it from the first until about the sixth. And I've been hovering in the top 10 all the way up until this afternoon or this evening, where we fell a little bit on the grind, but it's been performing very well. Um, I've played 170 games with this deck since the Zendikar Rising dropped. I've held over a 70% win rate. And the only matchup that I have actually unfavorable um, record against is Teamer Clover. Um, I've managed 50% or better against every other deck, and I've managed 60% against most of the meta decks. The decks that give us the most problems, other than Teamer Clover, are Abzan Control, and the four color decks are definitely a challenge. All the Omnath decks. Um, Omnath Ramp is less problematic than Omnath Adventures, but we definitely have a swinger's chance at both those matchups. So let me get into the deck itself. First, I'm going to go over all of the cards in the main, and then I'll go through the sideboard choices. So Swarm Shambler. Swarm Shambler, oops, hold on. Oh well. Swarm Shambler is a 1 mana 1/1, but it comes in with a counter on it. Anytime it becomes the target of an instant or a sorcery, it creates a 1/1 green insect token. And for 1 mana and a tap, you can grow it by one. Now, when this was spoiled, I thought, okay, decent card, but there's no way in heck this is going to replace or compare to Pelt Collector. And I was right. It doesn't do the same things Pelt Collector does. It doesn't grow for free. It doesn't create an incredible amount of pressure on its own. But the fact that it comes in with the 1/1 counter, the fact that it replaces itself if it's removed, um, and the fact that in board stall states it can grow all add up to just a lot of flexibility and a lot of power over time. I think the biggest advantage of this card that isn't, you're not going to find it in the text itself, is that it's all counters. So Gem Razor, which is the MVP, an incredibly important part of this deck in this meta, mutates onto it very well. And having good 1 and 2 cost mutate targets is incredibly important for dealing with some of the most powerful artifacts and enchantments that are currently in the meta. So Swarm Shambler is a 4 of, is a must, in my opinion, in any mono green stompy type deck. It is a great 1 drop. Stonequill Serpent, which it's been a staple in mono green for a very long time, and it's because of its flexibility. It's a curve fixer. You can slide it in at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever you need it to be. It can be, and again, it's also just a great mutate target. The protection from multicolored comes in handy for Croxa and Gigantha. You might run into some Polycate. Like, there's just a lot of multicolored creatures and spells out there. Zenith Flare that it dodges, which is relevant. And then, of course, the Reach and the Trample. It just kind of a Swiss Army knife of a creature that does everything. I don't think I would replace this with any other card. It's kind of the glue that holds this deck together. Primal Might, I contend that Primal Might is the best removal in standard, and it's definitely the best removal available to green. And the reason for that is that it's never dead cardboard. Even in creatureless matchups, this is still a pump spell. Um, there are, a lot of matchups where, uh, Elder Gargaroth, Croaks used to be Uro. But there's a lot of matchups where there's a 6/6, and we don't have any natural 6/6s. So this spell can let us reach up and reclaim the biggest creature on board status, which is very important in a lot of matchups. Anytime you're in a board stall, it's important to have the biggest creature so that you cannot so so that your opponent cannot attack into you profitably. So Primal Might is just a fantastic spell. On top of that, you can always cast it, and often do cast it for one if you are trying to fight down. So if your opponent drops an ooze and you have um, a Love Struck Beast on the field, you can just cast, and you're not in a position to attack, cast it for one and do something else with the rest of your mana. The flexibility of Primal Might is amazing, and that's kind of a theme that you're going to find in this deck. Is that we have growing creatures, we have creatures that tap for extra mana, we have creatures that eat the yard and grow. We just have a lot of ways to use our mana um, in in order to meet the situation at hand. And Primal Might is a marquee card in achieving that level of flexibility. I would in the main board. I don't think I would go below 4. I haven't gone below 4 Primal Might in the main board since M21 dropped. Um, it's just that good. Now the 2 drop is slot is where we find kind of the weakest part of the mono green stompy builds right now. There's just not a lot of great 2 drops available. We have chosen Nessian Horn Beetle and Scavenging Ooze. A lot of very good mono green players are going with Wildborn Preserver instead, and I think that's a very reasonable choice, perhaps even a better choice. I'm not going to um, try to argue that the Horn Beetle is far and away, you know, better than the Wildborn Preserver. They do different things, and they each do them well. It might be correct to run the Preserver. I prefer the Nessian Horn Beetle as it stands, but I could change on that opinion. But so the other options, we have the Horn Beetle, Scavenging Ooze. There's the Tajuro 3/2, but there's no party synergies, so that's not great. There's Lotus Cobra people have tried, and really that's kind of about it. There's also Gnarlid Protector, but I haven't really experimented with that. I just don't think it's super strong in the current meta and in this current deck. So the positives about Horn Beetle is that it grows on its own. We have so many ways to use our mana um, that we typically don't have a problem tapping out. And the fact that the Horn Beetle just kind of does its own thing as long as you have a 4 power creature on board, um, it is very nice in terms of creating that incredibly powerful board state. Um, Ooze, similarly, Ooze, I was down on Ooze and now I'm back up on Ooze. And the main reason is Rakdos mid range. There are just a ton of graveyard relevant matchups now. And so Ooze is back on the menu even after the Uro buff. Ooze is important as it ever was. So I run 3 of in the main. I wouldn't be mad at 4 of, but I just feel like um, the beetle growing on its own is pretty nice for us. And the fact that the beetle doesn't have to compete for graveyard resources means that if you have both of these down, they're both doing good things and they're different things. They're not fighting each other. Um, so we run 5 2 drops, up to 9 with the Stone Coil. Um, and that seems sufficient in this meta. Typically, you would want to be running more 2 drops, but with the weakness of the slot and the way the meta has shaped up, I feel like in between 4 and 6 is correct. So we went with 5. Love Struck Beast is a house. It's 6/6 of stats for 4. It's a turn 1 play and a turn 3 play. And the fact that we have Swarm Shambler to make it very easy to turn on. And that's another advantage that Swarm Shambler has over Pelt Collector is that you get to choose when it grows. And if it's targeted to be killed, it makes another 1/1, which makes keeping Lovestruck active a lot less of a headache. And that in turn allows you to avoid playing Stone Coils for 1 when you would much rather be pumping them for a lot more. So that was a situation you'd find yourself kind of in a devil's choice situation where you want to make a 5/5 Stone Coil. You don't have much else to do with your mana or your turn, but you have a dead Love Struck on the beast. So for tempo reasons, you're going to make a 1/1 Stone Coil, get in with your Love Struck, but maybe your Stone Coil gets Bone Crushed or Spike Hazard or something like that, and it all goes south for you. With the Swarm Shambler helping you avoid those situations, it kind of just smooths out your experience. I just put one Cheeky Harbinger in the main. Um, it's of course it's stellar in any matchup that runs black removal, and there is a fair bit amount of that in the meta. But the fact that the Harbinger, it doesn't turn on our Great Henge very well. Um, its stat line is relatively weak, um, means that I just can't justify running more of them. And the other big thing is that it's not a great gem raiser target. So you're always sad if you're in a situation where you need to kill a Clover or a Felidar retreat or a Doom Foretold, and you're having to do it on top of your Harbinger. So I don't want too many of them. Two could be correct. I run one. Kazando Mammoth. Oh, yeah, I haven't got. I'm gonna go over the land as soon as I've gone through the main deck, but Kazando Mammoth on its own is not a very impressive creature. It's a 3/3 for 3. It grows to 5 if you happen to be able to play a land on the turn that you're trying to get in with it, which is super relevant because it becomes another turn 4 Henge Enabler. And this is something that Zendikar actually, helped us out with a lot. Um, Prior to Zendikar Rising, we really only had Lovestruck Beast and a Gem Raised Stone Coil Serpent as our only ways to get to the turn for Henge. Um, and so it didn't happen all that consistently. It just wasn't a threat all that often. But with Zendikar and the Swarm Shamblers being full counter creatures means that we have Kazandu Mammoth, Lovestruck Beast. Those are 8 single card options to turn on your turn 4 Henge. But you also have, as opposed to just really 2 reasonable options, you have 4 reasonable mutate targets for your Gem Raiser to be another way to turn on your Henge, which gets you to effectively 12 ways that you can get that turn 4 Henge, which is an incredibly powerful position to be in. But speaking of Gem Raised targets, Yorvo. Yorvo was a card that I personally never ran prior to Zendikar in any quantity because the legendary rule was rough. It didn't turn on a turn 4 Henge, and it just didn't do anything fancy other than be a big dummy that got chump blocked, and it just didn't. In my opinion, it didn't have a very strong place in the meta. But with the Omnath decks, all of that has changed. They don't. Omnath doesn't have a great way to deal. They're typically low on interaction. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I've seen Omnath change over time to cap off this video. But for the most part, you can get away with dropping a Yorvo on turn 3, gem raising it into an 8/8 on turn 4, and then killing them and getting in for 8, and then using a Primal Might to make your 8/8 into a 12/12, and just those 3 cards on their own, uninteracted with, represents a turn 5 kill. If you played nothing else except for a Yorbo on 3, a Gem Raiser on 4, and then Primal Might juiced it on turn 5, that is a turn 5 kill. Of course, you can be doing things on turn 1 and turn 2, and you can be supplementing your turn 4 play with another thing. But yeah, so that's why it's so powerful. Like an 8/8 Trampler in this current meta just can't be handled by a lot of things efficiently. So that's why Yorvo's a 3 of. The other great thing about Yorvo carrying a Gem Raiser is that when you put the Gem Raiser on top, Yorvo loses the legendary creature restriction. So you can play a Yorvo, mutate onto it, and then play your second Yorvo and keep things moving. So that's a very powerful thing. Now let's move into the top end of the deck. In the main, I run one Vivian and two Henge. As the meta shifts, I'm noticing a lot more mono green, and in that case, it might be appropriate to move a few more into the main board. But I haven't made that change yet. Um, but I likely will soon if things persist as they have over the past 2 days. Um, so let's talk about Vivian. She is a 5 mana planeswalker, 3 colorless, 2 green. You are able to play creatures off the top of your library. So she is a draw engine as long as you're hitting creatures. Um, you can plus her to create a 3/3 green uh, beast creature token, and you can put a vigilance counter, a reach counter, or a trample counter on it. You can use her -2 ability that when you cast your next creature spell this turn, you search your library for a creature card with lesser converted mana cost, put it into the battlefield, and shuffle your library. You are often +1ing your Vivian, but there are a lot of times where you can search for a critical creature. And typically in this meta, it's Ooze. So, say your opponent is about to untap and cast a Kroxa. You can -2 your Vivian, play a Yorvo, a Harbinger, a Lovestruck Beast, an Armor Killer, a Mammoth, any of these. And then you're going to be able to tutor for your Ooze, put it on the battleground for free, and then eat your opponent's graveyard. That's the most typical way to use the minus ability. Another way in which you would opt to use the minus ability instead of the plus ability is if you have a henge down and you just seriously need to get card draw happening. Because if you have one creature in your hand and a bunch of lands or something, and there's a land on top of the deck, you can minus your Vivian, play the one creature that you have to play, bring out whatever the best creature is situationally for the moment, and then you're going to get 2 draws off that henge, which gives you 2 opportunities to keep spending all of that mana that you may have, and just have that powerful turn that's really going to flip the game for you. Great Henge has been around for a long time. I don't really need to explain it, and I've already talked at length about how it works. But yeah, the Henge is one of those cards where when you resolve it, your chances of winning that game go up tenfold. A resolved Henge is the best thing this can do, and these 2 cards synergize so well. One thing I would say is that Vivian's Advocate and the Great Henge combined to be the best value engines available in Standard right now. Um, Anytime that you are able to get a secondary draw engine for your Great Henge, you're going to win the game. You just are. Because the Henge on its own turns every creature you play into a 2-for-1. Um, But when you are getting those for free off the top of your deck, it's a de facto 3-for-1, and it just snowballs and snowballs and snowballs. It's incredibly powerful. So the Henge and the Vivian, in a lot of games, your goal is going to be to resolve a Vivian and a Henge at the same time. That's just an awesome place to be. So speaking of lands, you can see I have cheeky forest art. I couldn't make up my mind on what forest to be the best, so it's kind of hard to see here. But we are running 17 forests, 2 Castle Garenbrigs, 4 Turn Timber Symbiosis, and 4 Mammoths. So what this represents, we have 8 spell lands, 19 standard lands, so for a total of 27 lands, 4 of which are tapped. 27 lands is so nice to have as mono green. It's a situation we've never been in. Prior to the spell lands, we would typically be running 24. Some people would go to 25. Some people try to get away with 23. But Mana Screw and Mana Flood were the biggest issues for mono green Stompy prior to these spell lands, because you would typically be a henge deck and your creature density is incredibly important. So you the more lands you added and the more non-creatures you added, the more you diluted the possibility of henge drawing creatures instead of things that don't proc it. But with these spell lands, we are able to run 29 creatures, 27 lands, um, four fight spells, and an extra planeswalker. That level of spell, land, and creature density was never possible prior to Zendikar. And I feel like mono green in particular has benefited from these spell lands in ways that other archetypes haven't quite been able to capitalize on yet in their current builds. And that's one of the reasons why mono green has found itself in a very powerful place in the current meta. So speaking of Turn Timber Symbiosis, I run him as a 4 of. Not very many times is the shock. So to go over this card, if you play it as a land, you can pay 3 life to have it enter the battlefield untapped. The majority of times I'm playing this land, I'm going to be playing it tapped because I'm in a situation where I don't need the mana anyways. But if I do need the mana, it's always worth that 3 life because I'm either putting down a big blocker that's going to help save more than 3 life over the course of the game, or it's just allowing me to do something powerful that's going to let me close out the game, and I'm against a deck or an archetype that really isn't pressuring my life total anyways, which is very typical. But if you are, into the late game and you're in top deck mode, you say you have typically when you have a hand resolved or something along those lines, and you have 7 mana and nothing else to do, you can look at the top 7 cards of your library. 7 is a very deep look. And so with 29 creatures in a 60 card deck, you're always going to hit on this. I've never whiffed on a Turn Timber Symbiosis. If it's a 4 or greater creature, so if it is basically a Gem Raiser in our main, it's going to come in as a 4/4. Everything else that we play is going to get +3/3 counters. So your Yorvo's coming in as a 7/7. Your Lovestruck's coming in as an 8/8. Your Harbinger as a 7/6. So that's just a very powerful thing to do, especially when you're considering we're playing this as a land drop. So that option is great to have. So that's our main deck. And so just kind of walking through a game of, what are you trying to do? What's the best thing that you can do? So I'd say it's definitely a Swarm Shambler on 2, or on 1, into a Nessian Hornbeetle on 2, into either a Hardcast Lovestruck or a Yorvo Garenberg on 3. But I'm going to say that it's or Gem Razoring onto your 2/2 Shambler, or onto your Shambler on 3, and then resolving your hand on 4. That's kind of the best, any sort of combination of curving out with a 1, a 2, and a 3-drop play that uses all your pure mana and then enables your great hand on 4. That's the best thing you can do. That's always your goal. That's always what you're looking for. What you'll find yourself often doing is playing a 1/1 Shambler on 1, playing Heart's Desire on 2, tipping your Shambler so that it becomes a 2/2, and then you can Gem Raise onto your Shambler to make a 6/6. You can just kind of move on from there. But there's just a lot of ways to have a turn 2, and that's why we're getting away, I feel, with running a light on the 2-drop, is that we have a lot of other ways to make use of our mana on 2 that doesn't completely throw away the turn and does advance our board state. So yeah, that's how the deck operates. And let's go into the sideboard now. So you have Chainweb Arachner. This is kind of like the best sideboard deck in terms of just flipping a match on its head. This is targeted at Dimir Rogues, or really any mill deck, but Rogues primarily, because they couple the mill strategy with flyers. And this is a 1-mana 1/2. When it leaves the battlefield, it deals damage equal to its power to target creature with flying an opponent controls. So if you play this out of your hand, it can kill a Brazen Borrower. Other than that, it's a 1-mana 1/2 creature with reach. but you're not trying to play this out of your hand. You're trying to escape this. And rogues will typically throw this into your graveyard for you. And then for 5 mana, you can exile 4 other cards from your graveyard, and it escapes as a 4/5 that deals it damage to an opposing flying creature. So this can kill any flyer that Rogues has on their side of the board, and you escape it out of your graveyard that your opponent is actively milling. So very powerful. Lately, Rogues have been popping in Cling to Dust to try to combat this, and it's pretty effective. So that's something you want to pay attention to. Um, is that you might get this Clinged to Dust while it's on the stack. So be careful bringing this out into open mana when you have a read that they might have that spell in their hand. Ram Through is 3 of in the sideboard. I wouldn't be mad at you if you went to 4 of. I actually early in Zendikar Rising ran 4 Primal Might and 4 Ram Through in the main because the Omnath matchup just creates so many must-kill creatures that our fight spells are incredibly important. But I wasn't seeing a ton of Omnath on the ladder. And so I actually moved the Ram Throughs to my sideboard as a way to increase my creature density, bring in the Vivian, and give myself a shot at improving my win rate against non-Omnath decks specifically. So of course these come in 3 of whenever you're fighting Omnath. And what I've been doing in Omnath matches, I'm taking out my Henges, I'm taking out my Vivians because they're just too slow. You are trying to kill Omnath before they pop off. And by popping off, I mean, either casting 2 or 3 ultimate Genesis ultimatums in a turn. And there's just really no coming back from that, even if you have your Henge and your Vivian down. You're just going to die that turn. So I cut those and I bring in the Ram Throughs. And one thing I do on the draw often is I'm going to cut a regular forest, and I'm going to bring in the Garruk Unleashed. This is just another, it provides more pressure, and you can afford to go down on the forest because that puts us at an effect of 26 lands. And on the draw, that's fine because we're looking at that extra card anyways. So for Omnath, I'm going minus Vivian, -2 Henge, -1 Forest, +3 Ram Throughs, +1 Garruk Unleashed, typically. If I'm on the play again, I'm going to put that Forest back in. I'm going to probably cut a Mammoth maybe, or an Ooze, in order to make sure that we hit the untapped lands on the play. Garruk's Harbinger, I would love to fit more of these. I really, really would. But our sideboard is just so packed with necessary options that I just have the 1 and I go up to 2 for any matchup that has black removal. And that's Bloodchief's Thirst, Heartless Act, Eliminate, Hagra's Mauling. Those are all the cards that Garruk's Harbinger excels against. In those matchups, though, what you're going to want to pay very close attention to is Extinction Event. Extinction Event is typically one of the few cards that they have to deal with the Harbinger. So if you're resolving a Harbinger, you want to try to make sure that you have even threats on the board distributed so that when they play their Extinction Event, you still have a board presence to continue bonking their face with. Oakhome Adversary, Vivian's Monsters Advocate, and the Great Henge, these all come in against any matchup that routinely plays a 1 or 2 cost green creature, or green anything really, but it's all creatures in this current meta. That's what the Oakhome Adversaries are for. But these bottom 6 are all primarily here for the mirror, which is becoming more and more prevalent. Oakhome is a very powerful card when it is discounted. It can often put when you're playing it on curve, it can put your opponent into a lose lose situation where they either need to chump away their two drop in order to stop it from connecting face and giving you a card draw, um, or they need to allow you to draw that card. And if that happens, then off to the races, you're looking at a very advantageous situation. And Vivian and Henge, we just want to increase the density of those cards in the matchups where they are most critical, which is the mirror and which is Gruul. So that's when those are coming in. One note about Oklahoma Adversary is you should know that if you are in the mirror, your opponent is going to have access to them too. And so that might change the decisions that you're making in the early game. So, for instance, if you'd almost always want to play the Storm Shambler for one, but with the possibility or threat of an Oakham coming down, you would likely want a Heart's Desire instead until you can create a board state that you can handle that adversary. So to reiterate, if you have a reasonable choice to put a Stone Coil or a Heart's Desire on the board instead of a Swarm Shambler or a Horn Beetle, that often is the play until you can confirm either they don't have Oakham or you're ready to deal with it. And you can be ready to deal with it in a lot of ways. Either you have a 3/3 ooze, your beetle's grown, you got one of your 3 drops down. You just can't let that force a chump block or connect to your face, or you find yourself in a losing situation. So that's it for the deck tech and the sideboard guide. I hope you found it helpful. And I'll just note that things are always changing. Don't be afraid to tweak this. Don't. There are a lot of great cards in mono green right now. It is, infinitely malleable, and there's a lot of reasonable choices. This is what I've been running for the past few days, and it's been very successful, and it's felt great. But if your play style calls for another tech choice, don't hesitate to bring it in. And just I hope you enjoy playing mono green Stumpy on the ladder and find success with it.